billionaire ex-husband invited his poor ex-wife to Christmas Eve dinner. She arrived in a $950 million jet with their secret triplet daughters. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. May the Almighty wrap every woman in a light so gentle, so healing, that her soul finally feels the peace she has been giving to others her whole life. May every woman who cried in silence be rewarded with days filled with joy. May every woman who sacrificed her dreams so her family could rise be blessed with doors opening for her in ways she never imagined. And may every woman who carries pain behind her smile be surrounded with comfort, love, and strength that never fades. You are the heartbeat of every home, the wisdom that guides generations, the strength that holds the world together. I pray ease over your worries, healing over your wounds, and blessings that follow you like a shadow. May your nights be gentle, your mornings be bright, and your life be filled with respect and love beyond measure. The Gulfstream G650ER touched down on the private airstrip like a declaration of war, and Joe Tung felt every dollar of his net worth shrink in his chest. He'd been standing on the tarmac for 20 minutes, watching the winter sky and wondering if she'd actually come. The invitation had been sent 3 weeks ago. Cream cardstock, his family crest embossed in gold, the kind of formal nonsense his mother had insisted made the Tungs better than everyone else. Christmas Eve dinner, 6 o'clock. Your presence would honor me. He'd signed it himself, his hand shaking slightly, because writing her name after all these years felt like touching a live wire. Deandra Campbell. The woman he'd chosen against, the woman he'd traded for inheritance and approval and a life that had turned to ash in his mouth. He'd expected her to decline, or arrive in something modest, maybe with a chip on her shoulder and hurt in her eyes that he could soothe with wine and apologies and the carefully rehearsed speech about mistakes and growth and second chances that he'd practiced in his bathroom mirror like a teenager preparing for prom. Instead, the jet landed with the quiet confidence of extreme wealth, and Joe's carefully prepared speech evaporated. The stairs descended. Joe straightened his Tom Ford suit, the one his stylist had insisted made him look distinguished rather than desperate. He'd lost most of his hair over the years, gained lines around his eyes that no amount of expensive skincare could erase, and developed the slight paunch of a man who'd stopped having reasons to impress anyone. She emerged. Joe forgot how to breathe. Deandra Campbell was 50 years old and looked like time had given up trying to diminish her. She wore a charcoal suit that fit like architecture, not fashion, custom-tailored, probably Italian, definitely more expensive than anything in Joe's closet. No jewelry except a watch that was elegant and understated. Her hair was natural, cut short and precise. Her skin was flawless. Her expression was completely neutral. She looked at him the way you'd look at a moderately interesting building you were considering purchasing. Behind her came 3 younger women. Joe's knees went weak. They were in their 20s, moving with the synchronized grace of people who'd grown up together. The first was tall and lean, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and carrying a tablet. The second had Deandra's bone structure and a banker's sharp suit. The third was dressed like she'd walked off a tech conference stage, blazer over a graphic tee, confident swagger. Daughters. His daughters. The ones he'd never known existed because he'd been too much of a coward to stay in touch after he'd married someone else. Mr. Tung. Deandra's voice was exactly as he remembered, warm alto with an edge that could cut glass. You said 6 o'clock. We're 3 minutes early. Shall we begin? Joe opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked like a fish drowning in air. The tall one with glasses stepped forward. I'm Laureen Campbell. Most people call me Larry. I'm an aerospace engineer. This is Maureen, Mo. She's in investment banking. And Colleen, we call her Curly. She runs a tech startup. She extended her hand professionally. We've heard absolutely nothing about you. The handshake was firm, polite, and completely devoid of warmth. Joe finally found words. I didn't know. About you. Any of you. We're aware. Mo's voice could have frozen vodka. Our mother is extremely private about her personal life. We use her name, not yours, so there's no public record linking us. It's quite efficient. Deandra walked past him toward the waiting car. Your driver is holding the door. I assume dinner is ready. I have a call with Singapore at 9, so we should keep to schedule. The ride to his estate was silent. Joe sat in the front passenger seat because putting him in back with the women felt too intimate. He kept glancing in the mirror at his daughters, their daughters, trying to catalogue every feature. Larry had his nose, Mo had his mother's cheekbones, but Deandra's eyes. Curly had a dimple in her left cheek that he remembered from Deandra's smile. None of them looked at him. They looked out windows at their phones, at each other with small shared glances that spoke of inside jokes and shared history and a complete family unit he'd never been part of. Joe's estate was beautiful, 12 acres, Georgian architecture, the kind of understated wealth that whispered rather than shouted. But as they pulled up the circular drive, he saw it through their eyes, pretty but small. His jet was smaller, his staff was minimal, his relevance was historical. Dinner was set in the formal dining room, crystal, china, candles, the works. Joe had hired his mother's favorite caterer, chosen wines he could barely afford, arranged flowers that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. It all felt pathetic now. They sat, Deandra at one end of the table, Joe at the other, the three daughters between them like a buffer zone. So, Joe poured wine with hands that shook slightly. I imagine you're wondering why I reached out after all this time. Actually, no. Larry cut her steak with surgical precision. Our mother explained, you have a manufacturing concern that's struggling. You need capital or expertise or both. You remember she exists. You assume she might be willing to help for old time's sake. It's fairly predictable. Joe flushed. That's not the only reason. But it's the primary one. Mo sipped her wine, evaluated it, seemed unimpressed. Which is fine. Business is business. But let's not pretend this is sentiment when it's economics. I wanted to see her. Joe's voice cracked slightly. I've thought about her every day for 23 years. And yet. Curly's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. You never looked her up. Never sent a letter. Never attempted contact until you needed something. That's an interesting definition of thinking about someone. Deandra cut in smoothly. Girls, let's keep this civil. She looked at Joe, and for the first time something flickered in her eyes. Not warmth. Recognition, maybe. You didn't know about them, that's true. I never told you I was pregnant. Why? Joe's question came out raw. Because you'd already made your choice. Deandra set down her fork. I was 2 months along when your parents delivered their ultimatum. Marry me, lose everything. Marry Bitsy Worthington, secure the dynasty. You chose Bitsy. They threatened. I know what they threatened. Deandra's voice never rose, but it filled the room. Money, position, inheritance. All the things you'd been raised to believe mattered more than anything else. And they were right, weren't they? Because you chose them. Joe had no defense. I found out about the babies 3 weeks after you married her, Deandra continued. I was sick every morning, working 2 jobs, living in a studio apartment that cost more than I made. And I thought about calling you, telling you, watching you pretend to care while knowing you'd already decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. I would have... What? Deandra's interruption was surgical. Left her? Defied your parents? Chosen differently? She shook her head. No, you would have sent money, set up a trust, done the responsible thing while staying safely married to the woman your mother approved of. And I would have spent 23 years watching you pretend we were enough when we clearly weren't. The room was silent, except for the grandfather clock in the corner marking seconds like a countdown. Larry spoke softly. Our mother worked 3 jobs while pregnant with us. She gave birth in a county hospital because she didn't have insurance. Her mother, our grandmother, moved in to help with childcare. We grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment watching her build something from nothing. She bought her first delivery truck when we were 6 months old, Mo added. Built a logistics company 1 contract at a time. By the time we were in elementary school, she had 5 trucks. By middle school, 50. By high school, 500. She's now on 3 continents. Curly's pride was obvious. 12,000 employees, contracts with major corporations and governments. Forbes called her the most innovative supply chain executive in the country 3 years running. Joe looked at Deandra, really looked, and saw something he'd missed before. Exhaustion, not physical, soul deep. The weariness of someone who'd fought every battle alone and won them all and was tired of being strong. "I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, tiny, useless. "Sorry doesn't interest me," Deandra stood, "but business might. I'm considering acquiring your manufacturing operation, not as charity, as expansion. Your production capabilities could complement my logistics network, but I'd be majority owner. You'd report to me." Joe's pride screamed. His bank account whispered that pride was expensive. "I'll think about it," he managed. "Don't take too long." Deandra moved toward the door, her daughters rising in synchronized motion. "I have other options, and I don't wait for men who've already proven they're slow to decide." At the door, she paused. "Thank you for dinner. It was adequate." Adequate. The word hung in the air as they left, and Joe stood alone in his dining room surrounded by crystal and china and the smoking ruins of every assumption he'd ever made about how this evening would go. Through the window, he watched the Gulf Stream take off, its lights disappearing into the dark sky like a receding verdict. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Larry. Mom says you'll probably call tomorrow with questions. Don't. Think first. Decide second. We don't have patience for men who waste our time figuring out what they want." Joe sat down in the wreckage of his pride and wondered if redemption was even possible when you'd already traded away everything that mattered. Chapter 2. The Daughters Who Don't Know Him. Larry looked at the man her mother once loved and saw only the arithmetic of cowardice. He'd chosen money over them, and now he had neither. She sat in her corner office 3 days after Christmas, reviewing aerospace specifications for a private satellite launch, while her mind kept drifting back to that dinner, to Joe Tung sitting at the head of his table like a king whose kingdom had foreclosed, to the way he'd looked at them, at her, Mo and Curly, with a hunger that was almost embarrassing, like they were something he'd lost in a divorce settlement and was just now realizing he wanted back. Her phone rang. Mo's name appeared on screen. "Tell me you're thinking about him too." Mo's voice carried the slight edge it always had when processing complicated emotions through analysis. "I'm thinking about Mom." Larry spun her chair toward the window. "Did you see her face when he apologized?" Like she'd heard it before. Curly joined the call, conference mode, the way they did everything important. Like she'd imagined that exact conversation 1,000 times and was disappointed by how predictable it was. She built an empire while he was married to a woman who destroyed him. Mo's banker brain never stopped calculating. He chose wrong on every level. Wrong woman, wrong values, wrong entire life. "So why did she go?" Larry asked the question they'd all been avoiding. Silence. "Because she needed to see what she didn't miss," Curly finally answered. "Or maybe because she needed to show him what he gave up. I can't decide which is sadder." Larry pulled up the file her mother had sent that morning. "She's serious about acquiring his company. These numbers are real. She could integrate his manufacturing into our supply chain, expand our capabilities significantly." "It's good business," Mo confirmed. "But it's also personal. Everything Mom does is both." Curly laughed without humor. She turned being abandoned into motivation, built a company out of spite and excellence. "We exist because one man chose money over her, so she decided to have more money than him and everyone like him." "That's reductive," Larry argued. "But not wrong," Mo countered. They'd had this conversation before, in different forms, throughout their lives. The three of them processing the absence of a father they'd never known through the presence of a mother who'd been everything, who'd worked impossible hours but never missed a recital, who'd built an empire but still made breakfast every Sunday, who'd taught them that love was action, not sentiment, and that people proved their worth through choices, not words. Are we angry at him? Curly asked. Yes, Larry and Mo answered simultaneously. But should we be? Curly pressed. He didn't know about us. Because he didn't ask. Mo's voice went sharp. Mom disappeared. He never looked for her, never tried to find out if she was okay, just married Bitsy Worthington and played aristocrat until it all fell apart. Larry pulled up another file. This one she'd compiled herself through basic internet searches. Bitsy was a nightmare. Public incidents at charity events, alienated his business partners, had affairs that made gossip columns. The divorce 5 years ago was brutal. Good, Mo said flatly. Is it though? Larry found herself playing devil's advocate. He paid for his choice, lost his wife, half his money, his mother's approval when Bitsy turned out to be exactly as awful as everyone but his mother could see. Mum paid more. Curly's response ended that argument. Larry thought about her mother at 27, pregnant with triplets, working multiple jobs while the man who'd gotten her pregnant sipped champagne at his wedding to someone else. The image made her physically angry. He wants to know us, Mo said carefully. You saw his face. He wants to be Dad. He's not Dad. Larry's response was automatic. Dad is a biological function. Father is earned. So what do we do? Curly asked. Larry made a decision. We test him. If Mom's going to acquire his company, he'll be around, working for her, under her authority. Let's see if he can handle being the one who reports to the woman he abandoned. You're cruel, Mo said admiringly. I'm practical, Larry corrected. If he wants into our lives, he proves he's worth the space he'll take up. They ended the call and Larry returned to her satellite specifications, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating trajectories of a different kind. Her mother had spent 23 years building something extraordinary from abandonment. Joe Tung had spent 23 years learning that his parents' values were worthless. The question was whether people could actually change, or if they just learned to perform change convincingly. Her phone buzzed, a text from their mother. I'm moving forward with the acquisition. It makes business sense. But I need you three to handle something. Larry waited. Invite him to dinner. Your place. Get to know him without me as buffer. I need objective assessments of who he actually is. Larry stared at the text. Her mother never asked them to do emotional reconnaissance. She handled her own battles. This was different. This was vulnerability disguised as strategy. She forwarded the text to Mo and Curly. Mo responded first. She still has feelings for him. Curly. Or she wants to know if we do. Larry. Either way, we're having dinner with our biological father, who's basically a stranger. This should be interesting. She composed the invitation carefully. Not warm, not hostile. Professional courtesy extended to someone entering their family's business orbit. She sent it before she could overthink. Joe Tung responded within minutes. I'd be honored. When and where? Larry scheduled it for the following week. She didn't explain that their place was a penthouse the three of them kept as shared territory, even though each had their own apartments. Didn't mention that it was decorated with photos of the four of them, mom plus daughters, with no gaps for absent fathers. Didn't warn him that he was walking into an interrogation disguised as Thai takeout. She simply sent the address and time and a final instruction. Come as yourself, not who you think we want you to be. Then she returned to her satellite trajectories, calculating the precise angle required to break free of gravity's pull, and wondered if people ever really escaped the orbits of their worst decisions. Chapter 3. The wife his mother chose. Bitsy Worthington Tung had been beautiful the way poison ivy is beautiful, vibrant, attention-grabbing, and utterly destructive to anything it touched. Joe sat in his study 5 days into the new year, staring at old wedding photos and wondering how he'd ever been stupid enough to call what he'd felt love. The album was leather-bound, expensive, full of images that looked like a fairy tale, and had been a slow-motion horror show. There was Bitsy in her $50,000 dress, smiling like she'd won a prize, which in her mind, she had. The Tung name, the estate, entry into circles she'd clawed her way toward since childhood. There was his mother, regal in lavender, beaming with satisfaction because she'd successfully steered her son away from that unsuitable girl and toward proper society. There was Joe, 27 years old and dying inside, smiling for cameras while knowing exactly what he'd traded away. The marriage had started bad and gotten worse. Bitsy wasn't evil exactly. She was product of her upbringing. A family with old name but no money, raised to believe appearance was everything, taught to value status over substance. She'd learned to weaponize her looks, her connections, her ability to say cutting things with a smile that made people uncertain whether they'd actually been insulted. She alienated Joe's business partners within the first year, made racist comments at a charity gala that went viral before viral was really a thing, showed up drunk to his father's funeral and tried to renegotiate the inheritance terms with the lawyers during the wake. Had an affair with her tennis instructor, then her yoga instructor, then someone on the board of the country club who cost Joe his membership when it all came out. She spent money like it was infinite, then criticized Joe for being cheap when he suggested budgets, called him soft for caring about employee welfare, mocked his interest in actually running the family business competently rather than just collecting dividends. Joe had tried to make it work because his mother had chosen her, and some pathetic part of him still believed his mother knew best. Even when Bitsy's behavior damaged relationships that took decades to build, even when she turned their home into a battlefield of casual cruelty and strategic infidelity, even when he'd wake up next to her and feel nothing but the weight of his own terrible choice pressing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe. The divorce 5 years ago had been his idea finally, after Bitsy's latest affair partner sent him photos just to twist the knife. She'd fought it viciously, not because she loved him, but because she loved his name. Took half of what remained after her spending had already gutted accounts. Married her tennis instructor 3 months later, in a ceremony Joe heard about through mutual friends who attended just to report back on the spectacle. His mother had never apologized, never admitted that Bitsy was exactly what everyone except her had seen clearly. She died 2 years ago, still insisting Bitsy was from good stock, that Joe had simply failed to manage her properly, that real tongue men knew how to control their wives. Joe closed the album and picked up his phone, scrolled through old text messages to find the thread from Larry, his daughter who was also somehow a stranger, confirming tonight's dinner. He'd spent the week researching them obsessively, found Larry's name on aerospace patents, discovered Mo's profile on her investment firm's website where she was listed as their youngest vice president, tracked down articles about Curly's startup's latest funding round where investors were calling her the next big thing in AI logistics. They'd built remarkable lives without him, and he felt the absence of his contribution like a physical ache. He'd also researched Deandra, though that felt like staring directly at the sun. Campbell Global Solutions was everywhere once he started looking. Her company moved products across continents, handled supply chains for corporations he'd heard of, had government contracts that suggested trust at the highest levels. There were interviews where she spoke about building her business, photos from industry conferences where she stood among titans looking like she belonged, and buried in an old society page from years ago, he'd found it. A wedding announcement, Deandra Campbell to Remington Chase. Real estate billionaire, old money, exactly the kind of man his parents would have approved of. The marriage had lasted hours, according to gossip sites Joe had descended to reading. Some incident at their wedding reception where Remington had seen Deandra talking to another man and gone ballistic with jealousy. Announced the divorce before the caterers had finished serving cake. The whole thing was so public, so humiliating, that Deandra had disappeared from society pages entirely for 2 years afterward. She'd been married, had twin daughters from that marriage, built her empire even higher, and never once in all those years of success and publicity and presence had she reached out to Joe. Why would she? He'd proven what he was worth to her. Nothing. Joe arrived at the penthouse building at 7 exactly. The lobby was modern, expensive, secure. The doorman checked his ID against a list before allowing him up. The elevator was fast and silent. The door to their penthouse opened before he could knock. Curly stood there in jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt, holding a beer. "You're punctual? Mum said you'd be either early or late, never on time. She lost the bet." She bet on me. Joe tried to make it a joke. She bets on everything. Curly stepped aside to let him in. It's how she thinks. Probabilities and patterns. You're a pattern she thought she'd solved. The penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing city lights, furniture that was comfortable rather than showy, and every wall covered in photos. Joe stopped breathing. There was Deandra holding 3 newborns, looking exhausted and fierce. The triplets at various ages, gap-toothed and grinning, dressed for what looked like school plays, graduating from high school in matching gowns. Deandra with them at college orientations, Deandra with them at what looked like Larry's master's ceremony, Deandra with them and 2 younger girls, the twins from her brief marriage, all 7 of them laughing at some shared joke. A complete family. No gaps, no absences, no room for anyone who hadn't been there from the beginning. Those are Sienna and Savannah. Mo appeared from the kitchen carrying spring rolls. Our half-sisters. They're 15. At their dad's place this week, though dad is a generous term, since Remington sees them maybe twice a year and mostly just sends money. He's another man who proved he didn't deserve Mom. Larry emerged with chopsticks. She's got a type, apparently. Men who choose everything but her. The words hit like a slap. They settled around a massive table, Thai takeout containers spread like a feast. It was casual, intimate, the kind of family dinner Joe had never experienced in his formal childhood. Mo opened the interrogation with banker precision. So walk us through your financial decisions. You inherited a profitable manufacturing company, married someone who apparently hemorrhaged money, and now you need our mother to save your business. What happened? Joe tried to find words that didn't sound like excuses. I trusted the wrong person, made choices that prioritized appearance over substance, let my mother's voice in my head louder than my own judgment. Expensive mistakes, Mo observed. The most expensive? Joe agreed. Larry leaned forward. What have you actually built on your own merit? Not inherited, not managed. Built. Joe opened his mouth, closed it. The answer was nothing, and they all knew it. That's what I thought. Larry's tone wasn't cruel, just factual. Our mother built an empire from nothing. We've built our careers from our own work. You've managed inheritance and failed at that. So what exactly are you offering here? I don't know. Joe's honesty surprised them. I don't know what I have that you'd want or need, but I'm trying to figure it out. Curly studied him. Why now? Why reach out after 23 years? Because I woke up one day and realized I'd spent my entire life doing what other people told me to do, and I'd ended up alone in a house full of things that don't matter. Joe met her eyes. Your mother is the only choice I ever made that actually meant something, and I chose wrong. I can't fix that. But I thought maybe I could at least acknowledge it. Acknowledgement is cheap, Mo said. What are you actually willing to do? Whatever it takes. Joe heard how naive that sounded. I know that's vague. I know it sounds like empty promise, but I don't know what else to say. They ate in silence for a while. Joe tried to appreciate the food, but everything tasted like cardboard. Finally, Larry spoke. Our mother doesn't need you. She never did. She built everything you see, her company, her life, us, without a single contribution from you. You understand that, right? Yes. We don't need you either, Mo added. We have a mother who's been everything. We have each other. We have lives that work. You're asking to be added to something that's already complete. I know. So what's in it for us? Curly's question was genuine, not hostile. Why should we let you into our lives when you bring nothing but history and regret? Joe had no answer that wasn't inadequate. The evening ended with polite distance. They didn't throw him out, but they didn't embrace him either. He left with the feeling of having failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. In his car, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a photo attached. The photo showed Deandra from behind, standing in what looked like her office, silhouetted against city lights. The text read, "This is what you chose against. Remember that before you decide whether you're actually ready to try. Larry. Joe drove home through empty streets, past houses full of families he'd never have, toward an estate that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, and for the first time in 23 years, he let himself actually feel the full weight of what he'd lost. It was crushing. Chapter 4. The Empire Built on Spite. Deandra had learned that the best revenge wasn't anger. It was building something so magnificent that everyone who'd underestimated you had to use your success as a unit of measurement. She stood in the operations center of Campbell Global Solutions, watching displays track shipments across 3 continents, and felt the satisfaction of being undeniable. This wasn't inherited wealth. This wasn't money married into or gifted or stumbled upon. This was built. Every contract earned, every expansion deliberate, every success carved from nothing by her own hands. Her phone rang. Larry's name appeared. How did he do? Deandra kept her voice neutral, professional, like she was asking about a job candidate rather than the man who'd broken her heart. He's honest about having nothing to offer. Larry's assessment was clinical. Self-aware enough to know he failed, not self-aware enough yet to understand how to be different. So he's learning. Deandra allowed herself a small smile. You're pleased by that, Larry observed. Why? Because unchanging failure would be boring. Deandra logged into her system, pulled up Joe's company analysis. And I'm about to offer him a position that will either prove he can grow or confirm he can't. Either outcome is useful. Mom, Larry's voice softened. Are you doing this for business or for closure? Deandra considered lying, then decided her daughters deserved better. Both. His manufacturing capabilities legitimately complement our logistics. And yes, I want to see if he's actually capable of being who he should have been 23 years ago. That's not fair to him. Nothing about this is fair. Deandra pulled up old files, photos from before. A young version of herself smiling at a young version of Joe, both of them stupid with love and blind to how fragile happiness could be. She deleted the photos with quick clicks. Fair would have been him standing up to his parents. Fair would have been him choosing me. Fair would have been raising our daughters together. Instead, he chose comfort, and I chose survival. Larry was quiet for a moment. We like him more than we want to. That surprised Deandra. Explain. He's broken in ways that are hard to hate. He knows he failed. He's not making excuses or blaming anyone but himself. Mo wanted to despise him, but she ended up just feeling sad for him. Deandra closed her eyes. Don't feel sad for him. He made his choices. So did you, Larry said gently. And you're still thinking about him after all this time. That means something. After the call ended, Deandra sat in her office and let herself remember. She'd been 27, working as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, when Joe Tung walked into her office with a problem. His family's manufacturing business needed better distribution, and he'd been tasked with finding solutions. He'd been charming and funny, and genuinely interested in her ideas, rather than dismissing them because she was young and female and black. They'd fallen into each other like people who'd been looking for exactly what the other person was without knowing it. For 6 months, it was perfect. He talked about marrying her, about building a life together, about how his family would love her once they met her. Then they met her. His parents had been polite in the way wealthy white people were polite when confronted with something that violated their worldview. They'd smiled with closed lips, asked invasive questions disguised as interest, and left making vague comments about how nice it was to meet Joe's friend. 2 weeks later, his mother had shown up at Deandra's apartment, alone. The conversation had been brief and devastating. Joseph will marry Bitsy Worthington in 3 months. The families have agreed. If you care about him at all, you'll disappear quietly. If you make trouble, we'll make your life very difficult. We have resources. You have nothing. Deandra had been 2 months pregnant and hadn't known it yet. She'd left town the next day. found out about the pregnancy a week later. Decided immediately that Joe would never know, because what would be the point? He'd chosen his path, she'd build her own. The triplets had been born in a county hospital during a snowstorm. Her mother had been there, holding her hand, telling her she was strong enough for this. And she had been. She'd worked 3 jobs while her mother watched the babies, saved money like it was oxygen. Bought her first delivery truck with money she'd earned loading freight at a warehouse during night shifts. The business had grown slowly, then quickly, then exponentially. Every contract was a middle finger to everyone who'd dismissed her. Every expansion was proof that being underestimated was an advantage if you were smart enough to use it. She'd been featured in business magazines, invited to speak at conferences, approached by men who saw her success as attractive rather than threatening. Remington Chase had seemed different. He was wealthy, established, interested in her mind as much as her company. He'd proposed with a massive diamond and promises about partnership and respect. They'd gotten married at City Hall, quick ceremony, just signatures and witnesses. The reception was scheduled for that evening at an exclusive venue. At the reception, Deandra had stepped outside for air and encountered a former colleague. They'd hugged hello, laughed about old stories, nothing remotely romantic. Remington had seen through the window, had stormed out, had accused her of cheating on their wedding day, had announced to the gathered guests that the marriage was over before appetizers were served. The humiliation had been volcanic. The twins, Sienna and Savannah, had been born from that disaster. Remington had demanded paternity tests, gotten them, then decided he wanted nothing to do with daily fatherhood. He sent money, but rarely visited. The girls knew him as someone who existed in their lives only financially. Deandra had learned from that too. Learned that even successful men could be petty and cruel and controlled by insecurity. Learned that marriage wasn't necessary for building family. Learned that her daughters were better off with one fully present parent than 2 half-committed ones. Her phone buzzed. A message from Joe. "I've reviewed your acquisition terms." "I accept. When do we start?" Deandra allowed herself a slight smile. "Tomorrow. My office. 7 a.m. Don't be late." She hit send and stood, walking to the window wall of her office. The city spread below her like evidence. Lights and buildings and motion, all of it possible because people built things, made choices, refused to accept limitations. Joe Tung was about to learn what it meant to work for someone who'd built everything he'd lost, and Deandra was going to watch every minute of it. Not for revenge, exactly. For verification. To see if people could actually change, or if they just learned to perform contrition convincingly enough to fool themselves. Either way, she'd know. And knowledge, unlike love, had never let her down. Chapter 5. The dinner where everything shifted. The second dinner invitation came from Larry, and that's when Joe realized he wasn't being given a chance. He was being studied, measured, and found wanting in real time. He arrived at their shared penthouse on a Thursday evening, still wearing his work clothes from his first week reporting to Deandra. The week had been humbling in ways he hadn't anticipated. She'd given him projects that mattered, then torn apart his initial proposals with surgical precision. She'd asked questions that exposed gaps in his thinking. She'd set standards he'd spent years not meeting, and she'd been completely professional about it, never personal. Never referencing their history, just ruthlessly competent and expecting the same from him. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and Joe was realizing he'd spent decades being mediocre without knowing it. Larry answered the door with Mo and Curly behind her. "We ordered Thai again. Apparently it's our thing with you now." Inside, the evening felt different, less formal. They were drinking beer instead of wine, sitting on the floor around the coffee table instead of at the dining table, like he'd been promoted from stranger to acquaintance. "So," Mo opened a container of pad thai. "Mum says you're not completely useless." "High praise from her means you're probably competent," Curly added. Joe laughed despite himself. "She's terrifying, in the best way. I've learned more in 1 week working for her than I learned in years running my own operation." "Because you were running a company you inherited," Larry said. Mom built hers. There's a difference between maintaining and creating. I'm realizing that. Joe accepted a beer, uncertain of the protocol. She sees connections I miss, anticipates problems before they materialize. It's like watching someone play chess while everyone else is playing checkers. They ate for a while in comfortable silence. Then Mo went for the kill. Walk us through your biggest professional failure. And don't say your marriage. That's personal. We want to know about business, Joe thought. There was a supplier relationship I destroyed through neglect. They'd been working with my family for generations. I got complacent, stopped checking in, assumed loyalty was permanent. They left for a competitor who actually paid attention to them. Cost me 3 major contracts. Why? Larry asked. Because I thought the relationship was transactional when it was actually personal. They didn't need me to wine and dine them. They needed me to give a damn about their business, their challenges, their success. And you didn't, Mo confirmed. No, Joe admitted. I didn't. I treated them like a resource instead of a partner. Curly leaned back. Mom's entire business model is relationships. She treats every contract like a partnership. Invests in suppliers succeeding because their success is her success. It's why people work with her even when competitors offer lower prices. I've noticed, Joe said. I asked her about it. She said, people remember how you make them feel, and business is just people making decisions together. It's simple, and I'd never thought about it that way. Larry studied him. So what are you learning about yourself? Joe set down his beer. That I've spent my entire life going through motions without understanding why the motions mattered. I managed my inheritance like it was a trust fund to maintain, rather than a business to grow. I married Bitsy because my mother told me to, without asking if I actually wanted that life. I let your mother go because keeping her seemed harder than letting her disappear. All of that is passive, Mo observed. You let things happen to you. Yes. Joe's agreement was immediate. I've been passive my entire life, reactive instead of active, and the results speak for themselves. Curly shifted the conversation. Tell us about Bitsy. Not the bad parts. We know she was awful. Tell us about why you married her. Joe considered this carefully. She was what my parents wanted, and I'd spent my life believing my parents knew better than I did. My mother said Bitsy was suitable. My father said she came from good family. They made it sound like marrying her was the responsible choice, and I'd been raised to believe responsibility mattered more than happiness. Did you love her? Larry asked. No. Joe's honesty surprised them. I told myself I could learn to love her. That love grew from commitment and shared experience. But I was lying to myself because admitting I didn't love her meant admitting I'd chosen wrong, and I couldn't handle that truth. So you stayed miserable for years, Mo concluded. I stayed miserable until she made staying impossible, Joe corrected. Even then, I didn't leave for me. I left because she'd humiliated me publicly enough times that not leaving would have looked weak. The room was quiet. That's pathetic, Curly said, not unkindly, just factually. Yes, Joe agreed. It was. Larry stood, retrieved something from a side table, returned with a photo album. She opened it to a specific page and turned it toward Joe. The photo showed Deandra at maybe 28, holding 3 newborns, looking into the camera with an expression Joe had never seen, fierce protection mixed with bone-deep exhaustion, mixed with something like joy. That's us, Larry said softly. 6 months old. Mom was working 3 jobs, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. Her mother, our grandmother, was living with her to help with childcare. They had almost no money. Mo turned the page. Another photo. Deandra with the triplets at maybe age 4, all of them in matching Halloween costumes, grinning. She made those costumes herself, Mo said. Couldn't afford store-bought. Sat up sewing after we went to bed because she wanted us to have the same kind of Halloween the rich kids had. Curly turned more pages. Deandra at their school plays, at their graduations, at their college move-ins, at their career milestones, every single photo showing a woman who'd chosen her daughters over everything else, again and again, without complaint or expectation of recognition. She never told us we were the reason she couldn't date, Larry continued. Never made us feel like we'd cost her anything. She just built a life that included us completely and made it look effortless when it must have been impossibly hard. Joe's throat was tight. So when you say you're sorry, Mo's voice carried absolute authority. When you say you made a mistake, when you say you want another chance, understand that we're not just your daughters, we're her daughters, and we've watched her be everything for 23 years. You don't get to waltz in now and pretend that's a role you can share. I'm not trying to replace her, Joe managed. Good, Curly said, because you couldn't. The question is whether you can be something useful, something additive, something that makes her life better rather than just making yourself feel less guilty. Larry closed the album. We're telling you this because Mom won't. She's too proud and too private, but we see her. We see that she's tired. We see that building everything alone cost her something, even if she'd never admit it. What do you want from me? Joe asked. We want you to decide what you actually want, Mo said. Do you want to assuage your guilt? Do you want to play father to make yourself feel better? Do you want to win her back because losing bothers your ego? Or do you actually want to be useful? Larry finished. Because useful we might accept. Performative redemption will destroy. The evening ended without clear resolution. Joe left feeling like he'd been simultaneously welcomed and warned, embraced and rejected, given opportunity and promised consequences. In his car, his phone buzzed. A text from Deandra. The girl said dinner went well. I'm making you lead on the Riverside distribution project. Don't disappoint me. Joe stared at the text. Lead on a major project. Trust, responsibility. A test he could either pass or fail. He typed back, I won't. Her response came immediately. People always say that. Show me instead. Joe drove home through city lights and for the first time in 23 years felt like he might actually have something worth proving. Not for forgiveness, not for redemption, for the possibility of deserving to be in the same room as the woman he'd lost and the daughters he'd never known and the life he could have had if he'd been braver when it mattered. Chapter 6. The Business of Begging. Joe had spent his entire life believing his last name meant something, and now he was about to sign it away to the woman he'd traded for that name's privilege. The acquisition papers were spread across Deandra's conference table like a reckoning. Legal documents, transfer agreements, stock certificates, all of it reducing his family legacy to signatures and clauses. His company would become a division of Campbell Global Solutions. His employees would report to her systems. His name would be subsumed into her empire. His father would have died of shame. His mother would have disowned him. Joe had never felt more certain of anything in his life. He signed. Deandra watched with an expression he couldn't read. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just watchful attention, like she was waiting to see if he'd hesitate or flinch or show some residual pride that would tell her he wasn't serious. He didn't hesitate. Done. He set down the pen. Tongue manufacturing is yours. It's ours, Deandra corrected. You're still running operations. You're still responsible for production. You just report to me now instead of a board that let you coast. Fair enough. Joe gathered the papers, organized them with nervous energy. When do we start integration? We already started. Deandra pulled up a screen showing organizational charts, workflow diagrams, transition timelines. Your staff received notification this morning. Most are relieved. They've been worried about stability for years. A few are nervous about new management. Your job is to make this transition smooth. The next weeks were a masterclass in humility. Deandra's standards were brutal. She rejected his first 3 proposals for integration workflow, sent him back to revise production schedules, questioned his vendor relationships, and made him justify every contract. She attended his staff meetings unannounced, asked pointed questions that exposed inefficiencies he'd ignored, and set metrics he'd never thought to measure. She was also brilliant. Her insights cut through problems he'd been struggling with for months. She saw solutions he'd missed. She connected his manufacturing capabilities to her logistics network in ways that immediately added value. Within weeks, his former company was operating better than it had in years, and Joe was working harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He arrived early, stayed late, took work home. He revised proposals until they met her standards. He learned her systems, adopted her methods, studied how she thought so he could anticipate what she'd need. His staff noticed. "You're different," his production manager said one day. "More focused, like you actually care whether we succeed." Joe realized with shame that he'd spent years not caring that much, going through motions, maintaining rather than building. The recognition stung. There was a company holiday party in late January, casual gathering at a hotel ballroom, celebrating the acquisition and integration. Deandra attended with the triplets. Joe brought no one because there was no one to bring. He stood at the bar watching her work the room. She knew everyone's names, asked about their families, made people feel seen. She was magnetic in a way that had nothing to do with looks and everything to do with genuine interest in other humans. Joe felt the full weight of what he'd given up. A drunk executive from the old guard, someone Joe should have fired years ago, cornered Deandra near the buffet. Joe saw it happen from across the room, saw the man lean in too close, saw Deandra's posture shift to defensive, saw her say something sharp. The man grabbed her arm. Joe moved without thinking, not aggressively, but deliberately. He stepped between them with a calm, "Hey, we need you at the other bar," directed at the executive, while gently moving Deandra back. The man blinked, confused. "We were just talking." "No." Deandra's voice could have cut diamond. "You were drunk and inappropriate. You're fired. Security will escort you out." She gestured. 2 security guards appeared instantly. The man was removed while sputtering protests. Joe stood awkwardly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interfere. I just saw—" "You had my back." Deandra interrupted. "Not as my hero. Not trying to save me. Just as someone who saw a problem and stepped in. That's different." "You clearly didn't need me," Joe observed. "No." Deandra allowed the smallest smile. "But I appreciated it anyway." It was the first genuinely warm thing she'd said to him since Christmas. The party continued. Joe found himself talking with his daughters, their daughters, about the integration, about plans for expansion, about possibilities. They treated him professionally, but there was something softer now, like he'd passed some invisible test by not failing spectacularly. Mo pulled him aside at one point. "You're actually good at this. The work, I mean," Mums noticed. "She said that?" Joe tried not to sound too eager. "She said you're finally acting like someone who understands that effort matters," Mo corrected. "For Mum, that's practically a love sonnet." Joe laughed, despite himself. The party wound down. People left in groups, laughing and energized. The acquisition that could have been devastating had turned into opportunity, and staff felt it. Joe helped coordinate cleanup, stayed until the end, made sure everything was handled properly. When he finally left, he found Deandra in the parking garage, leaning against her car, looking at her phone. "Need a ride?" The words came out before he thought about them. "I have a car." She gestured to the Tesla. "I know, I just meant—" "Never mind." Joe turned to go. "Joe." He stopped. "Thank you. For tonight. For the work you've been doing. For actually trying instead of just performing effort." Deandra met his eyes. "I didn't expect that from you." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I expected you to coast on charm and apologies, to do the minimum while feeling sorry for yourself, to take up space without adding value." She paused. "I'm glad I was wrong." "So am I," Joe said quietly. They stood in the parking garage, years of history between them, the present moment uncertain. "This doesn't mean anything," Deandra said firmly. "You working hard, you being useful. It doesn't erase the past or guarantee anything about the future." "I know. I don't need you," she continued. "I built everything without you. I'm successful and happy and complete." "I know that too. So why are you still here?" The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely curious. Joe thought about it carefully. Because for the first time in 23 years, I'm doing something that actually matters. Working for something bigger than maintaining inheritance or living up to a name. You're teaching me what I should have learned decades ago, and I don't want to stop learning. Deandra studied him for a long moment. I'm not teaching you for you. I'm teaching you because it makes my company better. I know. Joe smiled slightly, but I'm still grateful. She got in her car without another word. The Tesla pulled away silently, disappearing into the night. Joe stood alone in the parking garage and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not redemption, not forgiveness, just the simple satisfaction of doing good work for someone who demanded his best. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Chapter 7. The Twins Who Changed Everything. Sienna and Savannah Chase were 15, whip-smart and absolutely uninterested in their mother's history until the history showed up at Christmas dinner looking like regret in a Tom Ford suit. Joe met them in February at a Sunday brunch Deandra hosted at her penthouse. The invitation had surprised him. It was family time, not business, and he wasn't sure which category he fell into. The twins were nothing like the triplets. Where Larry, Mo, and Curly were adults with established careers and measured responses, Sienna and Savannah were teenagers, immediate, emotional, unfiltered. Sienna had her mother's eyes and an artist's hands, permanently stained with charcoal. Savannah had an athlete's build and the kind of restless energy that made sitting still look painful. Both of them looked at Joe like he was a math problem they were deciding whether to solve. "So," Sienna said approximately 30 seconds after being introduced, "you're the guy who picked money over Mom." "Cece." Deandra's voice carried warning. "What? It's true." Sienna turned to Joe. "Your parents said marry the white girl or lose your inheritance. You married the white girl. Math is simple." Joe had no defense prepared for teenage bluntness. Savannah leaned forward. "Our dad picked his pride over Mom. You picked money. Both of you made her not enough. How does that feel?" "Awful," Joe answered honestly. "It feels awful every single day." The twins exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. "At least he's honest," Savannah conceded. "Honesty is baseline." Sienna countered. "Dogs are honest. We need more than not lying." Larry laughed from the kitchen. "I like them." Brunch was chaos in the best way. 7 women and Joe, all of them talking over each other, sharing food, telling stories. The triplets treated their half-sisters with obvious affection, including them in everything, making sure they felt central rather than peripheral. Joe watched Deandra with her daughters and saw something he'd never seen in his own childhood. Ease. His mother had been formal, distant, more concerned with propriety than warmth. Deandra was in sweatpants and a Stanford hoodie, laughing at the twins' stories, teasing the triplets about their workaholic tendencies, completely present in a way that made the penthouse feel less like real estate and more like home. He felt the absence of his contribution like a physical wound. After brunch, while others cleaned up, Savannah cornered Joe on the balcony. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you actually want to be in our lives? Or are you just trying to feel less guilty about the past?" Joe considered lying, then remembered Sienna's comment about honesty being baseline. "Both, maybe? I feel incredibly guilty, but I also look at all of you, you and Sienna, the triplets, your mom, and think you're the most remarkable people I've ever met, and I'd like to know you better. Not because I deserve to, because knowing you seems like it would make me less of whatever I've been." Savannah processed this. "That's pretty honest. Your sister set the standard. She's not wrong, though. Our dad does the same thing you did. Sends money but doesn't show up, bails when things are hard, makes Mom handle everything alone." Savannah kicked at the balcony railing. "We're supposed to visit him next weekend. He'll probably cancel." "Does he cancel often?" "Every third visit, maybe. He's busy, important real estate guy. We're just kids from a marriage that lasted less than a day. Savannah tried to sound casual about it and failed completely. Joe recognized that hurt. That's his failure, not yours. Obviously, Savannah said with teenage certainty covering teenage pain, but it still sucks. Over the following weeks, Joe started showing up for things he wasn't required to attend. Sienna had an art show at her school. Joe went. Savannah had a track meet. Joe was there. Not trying to be their father, just being present in a way Remington Chase apparently wasn't. At Sienna's art show, he stood in front of her charcoal series. Portraits of her mother at different ages, drawn from old photos. Young Deandra with her first delivery truck. Deandra pregnant with the triplets. Deandra at various business milestones. The progression told a story of someone building themselves from nothing. "These are extraordinary," Joe said quietly. Sienna appeared beside him. "They're my college portfolio. Mom doesn't know I'm submitting yet. I'm applying to art schools she thinks are impractical." "Are they impractical?" "Probably." Sienna smiled slightly. "But she didn't build a logistics empire by being practical. She did it by being stubborn and excellent. I figure I inherited both, so I might as well use them." Joe laughed. "That's solid logic." "You're not going to tell her?" Sienna asked. "Not my place," Joe said. "But for what it's worth, I think she'd be proud. Terrified, but proud." At Savannah's track meet, Joe watched her run the 800 meters, middle distance, the worst kind of race, too long to sprint, too short to pace conservatively. She ran like she was angry at the track, pushing hard, finishing strong, collapsing afterward with that particular exhaustion of someone who'd left everything on the course. He found her afterward with water and a protein bar. "That was impressive." "I got third," Savannah gasped. "Out of how many?" 12, but I wanted first." "So, train harder and get first next time," Joe said. "But today third is still pretty damn good." Savannah looked at him with something like surprise. "You sound like Mom." "Your mom is usually right about most things." "Yeah," Savannah accepted the water. "She is." The twins started texting him occasionally. Nothing deep. Sienna sending photos of artwork in progress. Savannah sharing memes about running. Small connections that felt more significant than they should. Deandra noticed. "You're spending time with the twins." "They're interesting people," Joe said carefully. "And Remington's not exactly present in their lives. That's his loss." Deandra's tone suggested the topic was closed. "Can I ask you something?" Joe ventured. "You're going to regardless. Why did you marry him? Remington. What made him seem different from what I was?" Deandra was quiet for a long moment. "He seemed stable, successful, interested in my mind, not just my body or my company. He respected my work." She paused. "Or I thought he did. Turns out he was insecure and controlling, and his respect only extended as far as his ego allowed." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I got Sienna and Savannah from that disaster. They're worth every humiliation." Deandra met his eyes. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? That your daughters matter more than any man ever could. That I've spent my entire adult life choosing them first. Anyone who wants into our lives needs to understand that's not changing. Ever." "I wouldn't want it to," Joe said honestly. Something in Deandra's expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but recognition maybe. "You're being useful. To the business, to the twins, even to the triplets, though they won't admit it. That's not nothing." "But it's not enough?" Joe asked. "I don't know yet," Deandra admitted. "Ask me again in a year." Joe left that conversation feeling like he'd been given a timeline, not for forgiveness, not for romance, but for proving whether he could actually be someone who added value rather than just taking up space. He'd spent 23 years failing. He had a year to prove he could succeed. It felt simultaneously impossible and absolutely essential. Chapter 8. The Mother Who Returned. Joe's sister Victoria arrived 3 days before New Year's with a lawyer, a claim to their father's estate, and the casual cruelty of someone who'd learned to weaponize inheritance the way their parents had. Joe hadn't spoken to Victoria in 5 years, not since his divorce, when she'd sided with their mother's assessment that Joe had failed to manage Bitsy properly. Victoria had always been their mother's favorite, the daughter who'd married appropriately, socialized correctly, never questioned family values or expectations. She showed up at his office unannounced, looking like money in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Joseph." She didn't hug him. "We need to talk about Father's will." Joe's father had died years ago. The estate settled through trusts and distributions that everyone had accepted. This made no sense. The estate was handled. What's there to discuss? "I'm contesting the current distribution." Victoria handed him a legal document. "Father's will specified provisions contingent on maintaining family standards. You've violated those standards by divorcing Mother's choice and entering into questionable business arrangements." Joe scanned the document. It was professionally prepared, legally dense, and completely absurd. "You're suing me because I divorced Bitsy?" "I'm ensuring family assets are protected by family members who respect our values," Victoria corrected. "Your recent decisions, merging your company with that woman's business, associating with her illegitimate children, suggest you've abandoned what our parents built." Joe felt something cold settle in his chest. "That woman has a name. Those children are my daughters. They're mistakes you were smart enough to avoid until recently." Victoria's tone suggested she was being reasonable. "Mother spent years cleaning up your poor judgment regarding that situation. Now you're undoing her work by bringing them into family business. Get out." Joe's voice was quiet and absolute. "I will not." Victoria settled into a chair. "We're family, Joseph. This conversation is necessary. If you divest from that woman's company and distance yourself from her children, I'll drop the contest. Otherwise, we'll let the courts decide whether you've honored Father's legacy." Joe stood. "I'm going to say this once. Deandra Campbell is the most remarkable person I've ever met. My daughters, all 5 of them, are extraordinary. Associating with them is the best decision I've made in 23 years. If you think Father's legacy is worth more than they are, you can take every penny and go to hell with it." Victoria's expression hardened. "Mother was right about you. You're weak, sentimental, too stupid to recognize when you're being used by people who see you as a meal ticket." "Victoria!" Joe's voice carried authority he'd never heard from himself before. "Leave, now, before I have security remove you." She left with cold fury, radiating off her like dry ice, promising legal action and family consequences. Joe immediately called Deandra. "We have a problem." He explained Victoria's lawsuit, the claims, the threat. Deandra's response was calm. "This affects the acquisition. If she wins, it destabilizes the merger. We'll need legal counsel." "I'm not fighting her," Joe interrupted. "She can have it, all of it. I'm not using family money as leverage against my daughters." "That's noble but impractical," Deandra said. "We need to respond strategically, not emotionally." The legal mediation happened 2 weeks later. Neutral conference room, lawyers on both sides, Victoria looking smugly confident. The lawyers presented arguments about estate interpretation, family values, conditional inheritance. Joe sat silently until asked to speak. "I choose my daughters," he said simply, "whatever that costs." Victoria's lawyer tried to argue that Joe's judgment was compromised by romantic feelings for Deandra, that he was being manipulated, that his association with illegitimate children proved his unfitness to manage family assets. Larry was in the room as Deandra's representative. She stood up slowly, and Joe recognized his own bone structure in her face when she was angry. "My mother built a company worth more than your entire family's legacy." Larry's voice could have stripped paint. "She did it alone. While raising 3 daughters your brother didn't bother to acknowledge for 23 years. She doesn't need his money. She never has. This lawsuit is about your insecurity, not his competence. Victoria smiled coldly. I'm sure your mother taught you to be articulate when defending her interests. My mother taught me to recognize cowards, Larry countered. You're suing because your brother finally grew a spine, and it bothers you that he chose differently than you would. The mediation dissolved into arguments. Joe's lawyers recommended fighting, protecting his assets, countering Victoria's claims. Joe refused. She can have it, all of it. I'm done treating inheritance like it matters more than people. The decision shocked everyone except Deandra, who watched him with an expression he couldn't read. Later, in her car, she was quiet for a long time. You know you just gave up significant wealth. I gave up money my father left me conditionally. Deandra, my parents made me choose between you and inheritance 23 years ago. I chose inheritance and regretted it every day since. I'm not making that mistake twice. This isn't the same situation, Deandra pointed out. No, Joe agreed, because this time I actually understand what matters. Deandra pulled over, parked, turned to face him. Why are you doing this? Because you built an empire from nothing while I coasted on inheritance and failed anyway. Because our daughters are extraordinary despite me contributing nothing. Because money my father left conditionally on me maintaining his values isn't money I want. Joe met her eyes. I'm doing this because I'm finally choosing right. Deandra was quiet. This doesn't mean anything between us changes. I know. You're not doing this to win me back. I'm doing this to become someone who deserves to be in the same room as you, Joe corrected. Whether that leads anywhere else is entirely up to you. They drove the rest of the way in silence. 2 days later, Victoria's lawsuit escalated. She filed new documents, more aggressive claims, arguing that Joe's relationship with Deandra proved he was mentally unfit to manage family assets. And then she played her nuclear option. She hired Remington Chase as a character witness to testify that Deandra was an unstable partner who drove men away and was manipulating Joe for financial gain. Remington agreed, seeing an opportunity to hurt Deandra one more time. When Deandra received the subpoena, Joe was in her office for a routine meeting. She read it silently, her expression going carefully neutral in a way that told him she was furious. Remington is testifying against me, she said flatly. Then we fight him, Joe said immediately. I got you into this. Joe stood. My sister, my family's dysfunction. I'm not letting them use Remington's bitterness as a weapon against you. Deandra looked at him for a long moment. You understand what he'll say. The lies he'll tell. The humiliation he'll try to cause. I understand he's a small man who's been threatened by extraordinary women his entire life, Joe said, and I understand that extraordinary women don't need me to save them, but they might accept someone standing beside them while they win. Deandra almost smiled. That's presumptuous. Probably, Joe admitted, but I'm trying. The battle lines were drawn. Victoria and Remington on one side, trying to prove Deandra was a manipulative liability. Joe and Deandra on the other, trying to prove that choosing differently than his parents wanted wasn't the same as choosing wrong. And in the middle, 5 daughters watching to see if their father was actually capable of fighting for something that mattered, or if he'd fold the moment things got difficult. Joe had spent 23 years folding. This time, he planned to stand. Chapter 9. The Deposition That Became a Reckoning. The conference room had been designed to intimidate, all glass and steel and the kind of silence that made every word feel like perjury, but Deandra walked in like she owned the building, because she did. The legal deposition was formal procedure made personal by Victoria's strategy. Remington Chase sat beside her lawyer, looking successful and smug, and ready to destroy his ex-wife's reputation for sport. Deandra sat across from them in a navy suit that cost more than Remington's watch and looked less expensive because quality didn't need to announce itself. Her lawyer was beside her, Joe sat behind them in the gallery, not allowed to participate but determined to witness. Victoria's lawyer started with preliminary questions, establishing timeline, confirming Deandra's relationship with Joe decades ago, building toward the character assassination they'd prepared. Then they brought in Remington. "Mr. Chase," the lawyer's tone was sympathetic. "You were briefly married to Ms. Campbell. Can you describe that relationship?" "Briefly is right." Remington's smile was practiced. "We were married about 6 hours before I realized she wasn't who she'd presented herself to be." "Can you elaborate?" "She was manipulative, unstable. The moment we were officially married, I found her outside our reception with another man. She claimed it was innocent, but her behavior throughout our relationship suggested she used men for advancement." Joe felt his hands clench. Deandra's expression remained neutral. "And this pattern of manipulation," the lawyer continued, "do you see it reflected in her current situation with Mr. Tung?" "Absolutely." Remington leaned forward. "Joe's a nice guy who feels guilty about his past. Deandra sees that vulnerability and exploits it. She's convinced him to sign over his family company, isolated him from his family, positioned herself to benefit from his guilt." The lawyer turned to Deandra. "Ms. Campbell, how do you respond to these characterizations?" Deandra's lawyer started to object, but Deandra stopped her with a hand. "Mr. Chase divorced me on our wedding day because he saw me talking to a former colleague and became irrationally jealous." Deandra's voice was steady, factual. "He didn't bother to ask questions or confirm his assumptions. He simply announced our marriage was over in front of 200 guests because his ego couldn't handle uncertainty." "That's not—" Remington started. "I'm not finished." Deandra interrupted. "You filed for divorce, refused to participate in our daughters' lives beyond financial support, and have spent years pretending the twins don't exist except when writing checks. Now you're here, testifying against me because Joe's sister offered you a chance to feel relevant in my life again. That's not me being manipulative. That's you being bitter." Remington's face flushed red. "And regarding Joe?" Deandra turned slightly to look at him. "He approached me with a business proposition that made sense for my company. I acquired his manufacturing division because it added value to my operations. If he chooses to give up his inheritance to his sister, that's his decision based on his values, not my manipulation." "Ms. Campbell," Victoria's lawyer shifted tactics. "You kept Mr. Tung's daughters from him for 23 years. Doesn't that suggest vindictiveness?" "I kept my daughters from a man who'd chosen differently," Deandra corrected. "He married someone else, built a life that didn't include me. Why would I insert our children into that situation? To what end? So he could feel obligated? So they could feel unwanted?" "They're his children," the lawyer pressed. "They're my children." Deandra's emphasis was subtle and devastating. "I carried them, birthed them, raised them, built a life that gave them everything they needed. Joe contributed DNA and absence. Those aren't equal investments." Joe felt that like a physical blow, accurate and awful. The deposition continued for hours. They attacked Deandra's business practices, her personal relationships, her parenting. They tried to paint her as vindictive and manipulative and opportunistic. She dismantled every argument with calm precision. Finally, they turned to Joe. "Mr. Tung." Victoria's lawyer gestured him forward. "You're not required to testify, but would you like to respond to anything said today?" Joe looked at his sister, at Remington, at the lawyers trying to use legal procedure as personal weapon. He stood. "I'd like to say something." His lawyer shook her head no. He ignored her. 23 years ago, my parents gave me a choice. Marry Deandra, lose my inheritance. Marry Bitsy Worthington, secure the family legacy. I chose the inheritance." Joe's voice was steady. "That's not Deandra being manipulative. That's me being a coward." "Joe," Victoria started, "I married Bitsy because my mother told me to. Bitsy destroyed my business relationships, my reputation, and my life. But that wasn't Bitsy's fault. That was mine for choosing someone I didn't love because I was afraid to disappoint my parents." He turned to Remington. "Deandra didn't manipulate you. You destroyed your own marriage with jealousy and insecurity. She was talking to a colleague at your wedding reception, and you couldn't handle that. That's your failure, not hers. This is inappropriate. Victoria's lawyer objected. What's inappropriate is using legal proceedings to punish my sister for me finally making a different choice. Joe faced Victoria directly. You're suing me because I chose Deandra's company over father's legacy, because I acknowledged my daughters instead of pretending they don't exist, because I'm finally living according to my values instead of our parents' values. You're giving up everything father built, Victoria said. Father built nothing. Joe's response was calm. Grandfather built the company. Father inherited it. I inherited it. None of us built anything. We just maintained and claimed credit. He turned to the lawyers. Deandra built Campbell Global Solutions from a single delivery truck while raising triplets alone. She didn't inherit wealth or position. She created it. And yes, I signed over my company to become part of hers because her company is actually successful and mine was failing. So you admit she has power over you. Victoria's lawyer pounced. She has power over everyone, Joe said simply, because she's brilliant and successful and commands respect through competence. That's not manipulation. That's excellence. The room was silent. I'm not testifying to defend her. Joe continued. She doesn't need defending. I'm testifying because everything said here today is a lie designed to punish her for my failures. Remington's bitter because she's more successful than he'll ever be. Victoria's angry because I chose differently than she would, but those are our problems, not hers. He looked at Deandra finally. I chose wrong 23 years ago. I chose money over love, inheritance over integrity. I lost everything that mattered and kept nothing that did. If I'm giving up what remains of father's estate, it's not because I'm being manipulated. It's because I'm finally learning what actually has value. The deposition ended shortly after. Victoria's lawyer realized the testimony had backfired. Instead of proving Deandra was manipulative, they'd proven that the men in her life were inadequate. Outside, Deandra was surrounded by her lawyers discussing next steps. Joe stood apart, uncertain of his role. The triplets appeared. They'd been watching from an observer room. Larry spoke first. That was either incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. Probably both, Joe admitted. Mum's going to be furious, Mo predicted. I know. But also maybe impressed, Curly added. You didn't ask permission, just did what you thought was right. Is that good? Joe asked. The triplets exchanged glances. We'll let you know, Larry said. The testimony went viral. Someone leaked it, and suddenly Joe's very public accounting of his failures became social media discourse. Think pieces about family pressure, interracial relationships, whether redemption was possible. His name trended. His sister received death threats from internet strangers who decided she was the villain. Joe ignored all of it. A week later, Victoria dropped the lawsuit. Not from change of heart, but because the publicity was destroying her. She released a statement about family healing and moving forward that everyone recognized as defeat, dressed as grace. Remington slunk back to his real estate empire, his reputation further damaged by being exposed as bitter and small. The twins showed up at Joe's apartment unannounced. Mom says we should invite you to family dinner. Is that her way of saying she doesn't hate me? Joe asked. It's her way of saying you're less useless than you used to be, Savannah corrected. Don't push it. Joe went to family dinner feeling like he'd passed some invisible test, but had no idea what the next test would be, or whether he'd keep passing indefinitely or eventually fail again. But for the first time in 23 years, he felt like he was actually in the arena trying, rather than sitting in the stands watching his life happen to him. Chapter 10. The New Year that demanded an answer. Midnight on New Year's Eve tasted like champagne and possibility, but Deandra stood on her penthouse balcony watching fireworks and wondering if some mistakes were too expensive to forgive, even when the person who made them had finally learned to count the cost. The custody hearing for the twins was scheduled for mid-January. Remington had filed for partial custody, not because he wanted to parent, but because losing the lawsuit had hurt his pride, and he needed to win something. His lawyers argued that Deandra's relationship with Joe created instability, that she was using the twins as pawns in business drama, that he deserved equal access to his daughters. The twins were terrified. They didn't want to live with Remington, didn't want to be forced into visitations with a man who'd spent years proving he couldn't be bothered to show up when it wasn't convenient. Joe had hired the best family law attorneys in the state, not to take over. Deandra had her own legal team, but to support her case however she needed. He'd spent weeks helping the twins prepare their testimony, coaching them on how to explain their preferences without bad-mouthing their father. He'd also spent weeks watching Deandra carry the weight of another man's vindictiveness and feeling the guilt of having contributed to that weight by bringing his own family dysfunction into her life. The New Year's party was at Deandra's penthouse. All 5 daughters, some of their friends, a few of Deandra's business associates. Joe had been invited and had spent 3 hours debating whether attending was appropriate. He went, because turning down an invitation felt like the kind of choice he'd made too many times before. The party was warm and loud and full of people who clearly loved each other. The triplets moved through the space like they owned it, because they did, technically, having gone in on the penthouse together. The twins were nervous energy, staying close to their mother, clearly stressed about the upcoming hearing. Joe stayed near the edges, useful when needed but not intrusive. He helped set up food, refilled drinks, made small talk with guests who had no idea who he was beyond someone who works with Deandra. At midnight, everyone gathered on the balcony. The city spread below, other buildings full of people celebrating, fireworks starting their displays across the skyline. 10, 9, 8! Joe watched Deandra surrounded by her daughters, all of them counting down together, and felt the full weight of everything he'd missed. 23 new years of watching them grow, 23 celebrations of being family, 23 years of choosing wrong while she built this. 3, 2, 1. Fireworks exploded across the sky. People cheered, hugged, kissed, celebrated the moment of transition from old year to new. Joe found himself next to Deandra at the balcony railing, both of them watching the display. "The hearing is in 2 weeks," she said quietly. "I know. The twins are terrified Remington will win partial custody, that they'll be forced to spend weekends with someone who's never bothered to be their father." "That won't happen," Joe said with more confidence than he felt. "You can't know that." "No," Joe admitted, "but I know your lawyers are better than his. I know the twins' testimony will be powerful. I know that courts generally listen to teenagers about custody preferences." Deandra was quiet for a moment. "You've been good with them. The twins. They trust you in a way they don't trust many people. They're remarkable kids," Joe said, "and they deserved a father who showed up. I can't be that retroactively, but I can be present now." "Why?" Deandra turned to face him fully. "Why are you doing all of this? The legal support, the time with the twins, the testimony that destroyed your relationship with your sister. What do you want, Joe?" Joe considered his answer carefully. "I can't give you back 23 years. I can't undo choosing my parents' approval over you. I can't make up for not being there when the triplets were born, or when they needed a father, or when you were building everything alone." "So what can you give me?" Deandra asked. "I can show up every day and choose right. Not for forgiveness, I don't deserve that, but because you deserve someone who chooses you every time, without hesitation or condition or exit strategy." "You know what the hardest part is?" Deandra's voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "I don't need you to choose me. I chose myself 23 years ago. I built this life. You're asking to join something that's already complete." "I know." Joe held her gaze. "And maybe that's why it matters, because I'm not completing you. I'm just asking if there's room for me to be part of something you've already made extraordinary." Fireworks continued their display across the sky, colors reflecting off glass buildings and water. "Remington is coming for my daughters," Deandra said. Victoria tried to take your company. We're both standing in wreckage of choices other people made for us or about us. So, here's what I need to know, Joe. If I let you close again, will you stay when it's hard? Or will you fold the first time someone offers you an easier path? I can't prove it with words, Joe said honestly, but I'll spend every day showing you. They stood together at the railing, the party continuing behind them, the city spread below full of other people's celebrations and struggles and choices. The moment felt balanced on the edge of possibility, not resolution, not conclusion, just the opening of something that might become important or might collapse under the weight of too much history. Inside, the 5 daughters were watching through the glass, not obviously, just aware, the way families were aware of their members' important moments. Do you think he'll stay? Sienna asked quietly. Maybe, Larry said. He's been consistent so far. Consistent isn't permanent, Mo countered. But it's a start, Curly offered. The twins exchanged glances. Mum deserves someone who stays, Savannah said firmly. She deserves someone who chooses her first, Sienna added. They watched their mother and Joe standing on the balcony, not touching, just existing in the same space with 23 years of history and an uncertain future between them. The fireworks finale began, massive displays of color and sound, the sky full of light and noise and celebration. The party guests cheered. The daughters moved closer to the window, and on the balcony Deandra and Joe stood together watching the show, not holding hands, not declaring anything, just present in a moment that felt like it might matter if they could figure out how to build on it. Deandra spoke first. The custody hearing is January 15th. The twins need support. I'll be there, Joe said immediately. The triplets are closing a major deal that week. They'll be stressed. I'll help however they need. And after all of that, Deandra continued, after the hearing and the deal and whatever crisis comes next, what then? Then we figure out the next thing, Joe said, and the thing after that, one day at a time, one choice at a time, until either you believe I'm serious or you decide I'm not. That could take years, Deandra observed. I have years, Joe said simply. I've already wasted 23. I'm willing to invest as many more as it takes. The fireworks ended. The sky went dark except for city lights and distant displays from other neighborhoods. The party guests started moving inside, getting refills, continuing conversations. Deandra turned to go inside, then paused. Joe. Yes? Thank you. For the deposition, for supporting the twins, for actually showing up instead of just sending money or good wishes from a distance. You're welcome. Don't make me regret it. She went inside to her daughters, her guests, her life that was full and complete without him. Joe stood on the balcony a moment longer, watching the city, thinking about choices and consequences, and whether redemption was something you earned or something you built, slowly through 1,000 small decisions to be better. Inside, Savannah approached her mother. So, is he staying? I don't know yet, Deandra admitted. But you're considering it, Sienna observed. I'm considering that people can change, Deandra corrected. Or at least I'm considering whether I'm willing to watch him try. The triplets joined the conversation. We had a pool going on whether you'd talk to him tonight, Mo admitted. Who won? Deandra asked. Larry, Mo said grudgingly. She bet you'd talk but not decide anything. Accurate. Deandra smiled slightly. They stood together, mother and daughters, the family they'd built without Joe, now deciding whether there was room for him to be part of it. Outside, Joe finally came back in. He didn't approach their circle, didn't interrupt their moment, just moved through the party being helpful, clearing plates, refilling drinks, existing in the space without demanding attention. Larry watched him. He's trying. Trying isn't enough, Mo said automatically. But it's more than doing nothing, Curly countered. And he's been consistent, Savannah added. For months, Sienna confirmed. They all looked at their mother, waiting for her assessment. Deandra watched Joe across the room. This man who'd chosen wrong and spent decades paying for it and was now trying to figure out how to choose differently. "Ask me again in a year," she said finally. "That's not an answer," Mo protested. "It's the only answer I have right now," Deandra said. "He's earning trust. Whether he earns enough is something only time will prove." The party continued. Midnight became 1 a.m., became 2 a.m. Guests started leaving. The daughters began cleanup. Joe helped without being asked, working beside them like he'd done this 1,000 times instead of this being only his second time in their space. At 3 a.m., only family remained. The 5 daughters sprawled across furniture, looking exhausted and happy. Deandra stood at the window watching the city. Joe gathered his coat. "I should go." "Yeah," Larry said. "See you Monday at the office." "Thanks for coming," Mo added, and it sounded almost genuine. The twins walked him to the elevator. In the hallway, Sienna spoke quietly. "The hearing is January 15th. Will you really be there?" "Front row," Joe confirmed. "Whatever you need." "Our dad won't be there," Savannah said. "He's filing for custody, but won't bother showing up. His lawyers will represent him." "That's his failure," Joe said, "not yours." The elevator arrived. Joe stepped in, turned to face them. "Thank you for letting me be here tonight," he said. "It meant more than you probably know." The doors closed. The twins returned to the penthouse where their mother and sisters were finishing cleanup. "He left," Sienna reported. "Did he seem okay?" Deandra asked, trying to sound casual. "He seemed like someone who's exactly where he wants to be, even though he knows he doesn't deserve it yet," Savannah said. Deandra smiled slightly. "That's accurate." They finished cleanup in comfortable silence. Eventually, everyone went to their respective rooms or apartments. The penthouse settled into quiet. Deandra stood on the balcony alone, watching the pre-dawn city, thinking about choices and second chances, and whether some mistakes could ever be unmade or only lived with differently. Her phone buzzed. A text from Joe. "Thank you for tonight, for letting me be part of it. I know I haven't earned that yet, but I'm trying to become someone who does." Deandra stared at the message for a long moment. She didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. She saved it, tucked her phone away, and watched the sun start to rise over the city full of people making choices that would define their lives. And thought, maybe, someday, if he keeps trying, if I keep healing, if we both become brave enough, maybe. The word hung in the air like a promise or a threat or just a possibility waiting to be proven one way or the other by time and effort and whether people could actually become different versions of themselves. The sun rose. A new year began, and Deandra Campbell stood in the wreckage and triumph of her extraordinary life, wondering if there was room for one more person who finally understood what she was worth. The answer wasn't yes, but it also wasn't no. And maybe that was enough for now. The end.